Hi there guys, this is something a little different from me because it's been a truly horrible week out in the world, and I wanted to talk about something a bit positive to try and detract from all the negativity and the hate that has been going on recently. So I'm going to have a bit of a discussion, and not necessarily about books, although it does touch upon books during it. So yeah, I'm going to talk to you about stories, and it's going to be exciting. It's one of my favourite subjects to talk about. This isn't a soothing cup of tea, by the way. This is coffee. So I love stories. I have ever since I was very small. My parents read to me, obviously from a very young age. That's why I am the way I am. And also, very importantly, my brother made up stories for me. He's 6 years older than me, and he very much encouraged my imagination. He encouraged this idea of creating worlds and narratives, and that was something that has stayed with me ever since. When I was a kid, I was the one who came up with the games that we played, and it wasn't games like, you have to see who can reach this fence post fastest. No, my games were a team of scientists who have been dropped into an unknown jungle, and something is stalking us through the woods, and we need to try to survive. So they weren't games with rules, they weren't athletic games, certainly. They were games of imagination that normally involved wandering around in the mud and woods until my trousers normally looked like a complete state, and my mum would get really angry at me. So in a way, I guess I have always been surrounded by stories. But then when I was thinking about that, I realised that kind of everyone is surrounded by stories. So when I'm talking about stories, I don't necessarily mean books. I do adore books, obviously. You can tell just by looking behind me. I have a big love of the written word. But for me, stories mean narratives. They mean ideas and themes and concepts. And when you stop to think about it, it can be kind of overwhelming, because to our knowledge, human beings are the only thing in 14 billion years of the universe existing since the Big Bang that sit around and make up stories to entertain each other. That's why we do it. We do it to pass on knowledge and to amuse each other, and we are the only single piece of carbon that we have come across that actually do that, and that's amazing. That's something brilliant. Human beings are capable of some horrible, very evil things, but I truly believe that stories and music are the two that we do that are very unique to human beings and are probably the most beautiful things that we do. And I just want a chance to celebrate that and to talk about them a little bit. So obviously, animals share knowledge. They teach their young, but humans are the only ones who do it through tales and through parables, which I think is something really important, because it's very unique to being human, and it is something that I think speaks to the core of being a human being. We love to be lost in other worlds, we love to be lost in stories, even stories of other people. So true stories people still absolutely adore. There are so many different ways of telling a story, and I think all humans on the planet somewhere engage in stories, even if they don't realise that they're doing it. And that's because that's what people yearn for. Stories and things like that are such a part of our makeup and our brains and how they work that we seek them out It's why millions of people go to see films, and why people buy books and people talk to each other. I mean, yes, it is about conveying information, but it's also, a lot of it is just to do with creating a sense of community and a sense of history, and stories do that. Stories are one of our most powerful tools as a species. So I think one of the reasons that I love stories so much is because there are so many effective ways to tell them. And there's a lot of snobbery goes on about books being the superior medium, which just isn't true. I mean, you can tell a story visually in a way that you can't in a book. So there are some films that can use long, wide-angle shots with no dialogue to convey a feeling and a sense of drama and scale in a way that a book can't. And obviously, on the flip side of that, a book can give a better sense of character and of intent. They can be much more introspective and examine a character's thought process in a way that films can't. And I think that you should definitely embrace both mediums of storytelling, because they're both equally valid, and some of my favourite stories work beautifully on the screen but would never work on the page, and that's something we never talk about. People often say, oh well, obviously the book was better than the film, but have you ever read a novelisation of a film? They're normally pretty poor. So things like Inception or Pan's Labyrinth or Black Swan, which are some of my favourite films in recent years, I don't think would work as a written narrative. They're to do with visuals, they're to do with colour, and to do with cinematography and things like that. And conversely, there are also books that I don't think would ever work on the screen. Patrick Ness's Chaos Walking trilogy, I think, would be far too complicated to get onto the screen. I think it works better in story form. And that's fine, it's okay. These things don't have to be translated across. It doesn't necessarily always work. But it does also mean that you shouldn't be ashamed for enjoying the film of a book. Maybe that's your favourite way of digesting stories, is visually. Maybe that's how you find it easiest, and that's fine. Ultimately, you are engaging with that innate, ancient feeling inside human beings to pick up stories and to engage with stories and to absorb stories, and however you want to choose to do that is a-okay by me, quite frankly. Another aspect of storytelling that I want to talk about that I don't feel like gets the attention it deserves is video games. Video games are an interactive storytelling medium. That's incredibly powerful. That's so powerful. It places the person engaging with that story right in it. It lets them affect the world around them, and that's so immersive and it's such a brilliant narrative device. And I think I will still argue that that BioShock is one of the best stories I have ever had the pleasure of losing myself in. It's beautifully written, it's visually stunning, and it's absolutely gorgeous, and there are loads of games out there that do that. So don't throw away the idea of video games as being running around shooting each other. Some of them are literally that, but there's also a lot of people out there working really hard to make emotionally articulate and very engaging video game stories, and you should check them out. You should give them a chance. If you've got a PC or you've got a laptop, you can download indie games that tell beautiful stories for next to nothing, and it's worth doing. You might just discover a way of experiencing stories that you hadn't thought about before. So why would you not do that? So yeah, from the people reading Charles Dickens and literary fiction, to the people reading mass market fiction on their e-readers, to your nan watching Coronation Street and the millions of people who go and see the latest Marvel film, we're all engaging in that very deep-rooted desire to experience stories that are, they're a huge part of what we do as a species. They are one of the most beautiful things we do as a species, and I would ask people to pack up their snobbery about there only being a particular way of engaging with a story. I mean, audiobooks are a fabulous way of getting into a narrative, and they hark back to how stories have always been told. Stories originally, before the written word, were oral, and that oral tradition of storytelling is no more or less valid than the written word. Engaging with a story that way allows you a great deal of nuance in kind of pitch and language and style of speaking that you don't get written down. You have to kind of work that part out for yourself, and for some people that's harder to do, or you get something out of an audiobook that you didn't quite pick up on in the book because of the subtleties of speech. I mean, everyone loves a story, and they have one natural home, and their natural home isn't on a page, it's not on a cinema screen, it's in the hearts and the minds of every single person. That's where stories live, that's where they're born, and that's where they grow. Stories are a special kind of magic, and I believe in their power with all of my heart. I think that they have the strength to make the world a better place. Okay, before anyone describes me as being in any way articulate, I should point out the following things are also things that I have described as magic, certainly within the last 2 weeks. Coffee, music, the Fibonacci sequence, music, coffee, Kate Bush, not just her works but also her as a person, she's a condensed form of magic. 3D printing, Buffy the Vampire Slayer, coffee, instant mash, scented candles, Brian Cox's hair, toast, coffee.